As some of you may know, I am attending YCS Seattle this year in 2024, and I'm really enjoying sharing my tips with you guys on how to play competitively as I find my way on this journey back to getting into Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, I do want to say that these particular tips in this video are not necessarily for a casual player or a nostalgic player, but for someone who's curious about playing competitively, getting back into tournaments, and even playing online in Master Duel, as I'm going to be competing in multiple categories of this event, both the tabletop TCG and the Master Duel format, possibly the Duel Links format if I have time, but so far these are the two categories that I'm entered to play in. I wanted to talk today about surrendering in a duel and 10 reasons why you really shouldn't surrender, and with a bonus item being at the end of the video, kind of one good reason to surrender. And remember, these tips are for competitive players, not necessarily for casual players. So if you're talking about playing for time or something like that, you just want to enjoy the game, these tips might not be just for the enjoyment of the game, but for being able to play in a tournament setting as well. Starting at number 1, evenly matched is a thing. Okay, so let's just immediately address stuff like evenly matched. If this card exists and you go second, we all know that that's great because then you can cause your opponent to banish a bunch of their cards, leaving them with practically nothing, allowing you to start the game as if you went first anyways. However, that being said, evenly matched is a card that you can still pull late game and hit your opponent with and cause them to kind of even out the board that way. This has happened to me many times in Master Duel where I've kind of just said, well, what if I stick out this duel and just kind of see where it goes? And you know, it's crazy. I was playing Salamangreats, ended up on pretty much nothing with a board, hit my opponent with evenly matched. Several times this happened in multiple different duels, and I was still able to pull a win out of my hat with basically just drawing 1 or 2 more cards, being patient enough to go through those grueling 2 turns that evenly matched had bought me, because it brought my opponent down to my level with basically card ratio. So always remember, you still have board breaker style cards that you can pull later, and honestly, evenly matched is one of my favorite board breakers of all time, so it's definitely one of the best cards to run in this scenario. Number 2, your opponent may surrender. So if you don't surrender, your opponent could possibly surrender. Now this could be due to a plethora of reasons of their own cards, or maybe they don't feel like playing that deck you're playing against. You can play your first combo piece, and then next thing you know, they're gonna scoop. But even if this doesn't happen and your opponent has a good board set up, I've played many duels with people where they have still surrendered even though they got off their primary combo that they were going to play, or they got the essential cards they needed to play, for many other reasons, some that we'll address on this list. But just remember, you're not the only one who can surrender. Your opponent can definitely do that too. If you surrender, your chance of loss is 100%, whereas if you don't surrender, then your chances are still something, right? Number 3, going into that same point just a little bit, your opponent may misplay. Now this can happen a lot of different ways depending on the deck that they're playing, of course. If they're new, you have no idea how new the other person is to the game or how new they are to the deck that they are playing. This could be a new archetype that's come out, or it could just be new to them in general, but still your opponent can misplay. This can give you opportunities to steal the win. Misplaying is a thing that happens, and unless you're playing bots all the time, which if you're playing competitively, you're most likely always playing people who are under pressure, they can definitely screw up a play and give you that opportunity to steal a win. Number 4. You can always learn something new the longer you draw out a game, okay? So even if you don't think you're going to catch the win, you might learn a new mechanic about your cards, especially if you're playing through Master Duel, because the game kind of highlights the things you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Whereas when you're playing the TCG in real life, you kind of have to pay more attention to what's going on and keep track of things. But especially while you're online, you're able to make those mistakes and kind of look back at them and even save replays from your duels to kind of check out what you did wrong, what you did right, and you might even realize there's some extra effects that you didn't really catch along the way. So always remember, there's that opportunity to learn and grow when you're playing a new deck, or even if you're playing a deck you've played a million times but you've played the same combo a lot. For example, that Salamangreat deck, there's just a few kind of combos. Honestly, if you're put in a pinch, there's some weird stuff you can do to kind of pull a win out of your hat. Number 5. So if you're playing in a match, a 2 out of 3 game, you can kind of get your opponent to reveal more of their cards, and this can be extremely useful information for later duels. So if I'm playing in the first game and I know my opponent has this in a bag, but I sit here and make them work for the win, I can actually find out more about their deck. And I'm going to use Salamangreats a lot for a reference point in this video just because it's nice and easy. But imagine that I have a Salamangreat deck and I put a few Balinxes in the graveyard, I got a few destruction protections, but I know I'm going to lose the duel. There's not much I can do. Maybe my life points just aren't up that high or anything. But now my opponent has to attack through. They've got to kind of like force me to use all the resources I've stacked up rather than me just scooping. This will kind of show me what tech choices they may have picked, or even what side deck cards they've chosen to put in their deck. This will give you the opportunity to counter them in that second or third round duel. Number 6. This can also put the pressure on your opponent. Just seeing you not scoop, not surrender at their combos forces them to kind of remember their combo correctly. It forces them to have that pressure on to get it right, to actually sustain that win. Basically forces them to kind of like, if you know you're going to lose, the pressure's off of you a bit, but if you know you're going to lose and you're going to play through anyway, it kind of still forces your opponent to keep track of what's going on a lot more than you have to at this point. And I think just adding that pressure, remember this is a competitive kind of scenario, so there's always a little bit of pressure with that. Applying as much of that as possible, that psychological effect will help you win some duels. And maybe even if it doesn't help you win the duel, again, all of the other points apply, and as well as the following. Number 7. You don't know if your opponent has bad hidden cards, and what I mean by this is anything that's set face down, or anything in their hand, even anything banished face down, all that kind of stuff. You never know what they drew, so even if you drew a bad hand and you're like, well, I bricked, I'm gonna scoop, you should still play through just to see kind of what your opponent has. Maybe they have a bad hand, and even if they don't, they have a great hand. You could have some stuff to interrupt them a bit, and remember that while you're putting pressure on them by still playing through, you can cause them to make certain mistakes. I know that one ties a bit into the last point, but still, you don't know what your opponent has until you see them play it. So remember that you can still play through at least just to see what they've got. Maybe they have crappy cards just like you do. You never know, guys. So always play through. Number 8. Strange alternate win conditions. Now this is one that doesn't come in quite as often, but I would have felt strange myself just for not mentioning it. But you have to remember that there are alternate win conditions. I have played against runic players that have basically gotten rid of too many of their own cards. I've played against players who didn't realize there were alternate win conditions built into their own decks even, because the core strategy was something entirely different. So remember, learning your archetypes will definitely help so that you can kind of go into different matches with more knowledge, of course, but also keeping track of those strange alternate win conditions such as decking out or locking the opponent out of being able to do things are great ways to actually still steal a win in an impossible situation. Number 9. Players may combo just because they can and still not know what to do with that whole combo line. For example, I was playing against another player who was playing Galaxy Eyes and just spammed every freaking Galaxy Eyes possible onto the field, but still didn't know how to deal with certain parts of my combo, allowing me to bait and negate out different things from their combo, breaking their board apart piece by piece. So your opponent might go for what's called win more, where they see they've got a pretty good setup going, so they keep stacking onto it, they keep drawing, maybe, you know, they got max seed into getting a few extra cards, so they think they're going to win more, which is actually what happened in my situation. And then next thing they know, they're so confident, they got such a big board, they've done all their combos, but they don't realize that you can still pick them apart with different cards and effects based off of the deck they're playing, of course. So remember that just because you see a player capable of comboing off and taking those 10-minute, 15-minute turns doesn't mean you're not capable of picking that board apart in 2-3 minutes and then passing turn and leaving them with little to nothing to respond with. So guys, don't scoop just because your opponent is playing for a really long time. Now, I will mention this again here a bit in the video about players playing for really long combos. If you're playing competitively, let your opponent, you know, play their long combo, do their BS, because you have to remember in a competitive setting, there is also a time limit to a lot of this stuff. If your opponent's comboing off, let them do it. You never know what you might pull and how you might be able to pick their board apart. Number 10. Now, my final point is pretty simple, but you should make your opponents always earn that win. If you're playing competitively, that means you've showed up, you've put your money into it, you've put time into your cards, maybe you've played for X amount of hours a week to get good. Maybe you're doing what I'm doing, where you're playing in multiple formats just so you can learn your combos and have them in aces, ready to play in that timed format. Either way, you've invested a lot of time into your strategy, so you should at least see it through and make your opponent earn that win. There have been plenty of times I've played in Master Duel especially, where I've played someone, made them earn the win, and I still felt pretty damn good about it at the end of the duel, because I saw some crazy shit I never would have saw if I didn't sit there and play through. And I even pulled off some crazy combos I didn't know I was capable of with my Solomon Great deck, as I don't use a lot of the other cards too often in that deck. Each time I get dwindled on resources, I start exploring the other extra deck options. It always gives me a unique point of view on something else I can do in a different match. So remember to make your opponents earn their wins. You had to earn your spot to be there at that tournament or in that competitive scene. Everyone should have to earn those wins. Surrendering also generally gets you in trouble online, if you will, as it knocks your rank down a bit when you're playing competitively. That's another reason not to really do that. And I promised you guys one more bonus thing, and that's a reason to surrender. Now, all of these reasons on this list are amazing reasons to not surrender. In a competitive scene, the only reason I could really see why you should surrender is if, for certain, I mean 100% for certain, your opponent's about to attack for game, there's no reason to follow through, so you say, I'm gonna scoop, let's go to game 2, save for time. Now that is a good reason to surrender. If you have a very limited amount of time for a match, you know your opponent plays BS that raises their life points maybe so that they can cut that time even and win the match on a technicality, it's a reason to kind of at least consider it. If you're playing a match and you definitely want to save for time and you know that you need to, I'm not gonna fault you for surrendering in that particular scenario. Now, in any of these other scenarios, I really do think you should play through. In a competitive setting, you should definitely only surrender if you're crunched for time. That being said, I will address for just a moment the competitive versus fun kind of play, that casual play, and that's in a casual duel. You should never be forced into a situation where surrendering is a regular thing. You're playing and someone is doing a 15-20 minute combo and you don't want to play against, players like that. I highly suggest you just play through certain formats where that stuff doesn't happen. Think about things like Edison format, Time Wizard format, if that's something you really just don't enjoy, you want something more casual. But if you're playing against modern decks, or you're playing online versus people, this is naturally a competitive scene. So it's something to look out for whenever you're playing against other players, making sure that you're also playing in the format that you enjoy so that it's not the kind of game that you don't enjoy. I see a lot of people get mixed up between these different formats, commenting about the TCG when it's a problem with the Master Duel format or vice versa. Make sure that you're playing in a format that you actually enjoy, otherwise you're just going to end up in one of these modern, fast-paced Yu-Gi-Oh formats that is maybe a bit much for what you're trying to play. Guys, thanks so much for checking out this video. If you're curious about Yu-Gi-Oh! Neo Duel, there are a few videos on this channel explaining how to play that, and we do plan on producing a short Yu-Gi-Oh! Neo Duel live action episode later on. If you're interested in that, please comment below about it and let me know your tips about not surrendering in a duel or good reasons you feel like surrendering if you've made it this far in the video. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.